The warehouse was burning, not the slow, creeping kind of fire that gives you time to think. This was an explosion of heat and rage, flames licking up through shattered windows, black smoke churning into the winter sky like a living thing. The radio crackled with commands, sharp and urgent, but Captain Reeves stood at the perimeter line with his arms crossed, blocking the entrance. "Stand down, Martinez. That's an order." Jake Martinez didn't move. His helmet was already on, his gloves tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. Beside him, low to the ground and trembling with focus, was Diesel, a German shepherd with amber eyes that never left the building. The dog's ears were pinned back, his nose working the air, and Jake knew that look. He'd seen it 100 times. Someone was inside. "Sir, Diesel's alerting. There's a person in there." "Negative. Building's been cleared. Structural engineers marked it yellow an hour ago. We don't risk lives for empty space." But Diesel wasn't wrong. He never was. Jake looked down at his partner, at the way the dog's paws dug into the asphalt, the way his body coiled like a spring. Then he looked back at the fire, at the third-floor window where the smoke was thickest, where the flames hadn't yet reached but would in minutes, and he made a choice. He unclipped Diesel's leash. "Martinez, don't you dare!" But Jake was already moving, and Diesel was a blur of black and tan muscle, racing toward the entrance with Jake right behind him. The heat hit like a wall. The smoke swallowed them whole. Behind them, Captain Reeves screamed into his radio, "Pull them out now!" But what Jake uncovered inside wasn't just a person. It was a truth that would shatter everything they thought they knew. 3 months earlier, the firehouse on Maple Street had been Jake's sanctuary. It sat on the edge of the industrial district, a 2-story brick building with red bay doors and a flagpole out front that clanged in the wind. The morning light came in through the high windows in golden streams, catching the dust motes and the scent of coffee brewing in the break room. The trucks gleamed in their bays, polished and ready, and the crew moved through their routines with the easy rhythm of people who trusted each other with their lives. Jake had been with Station 19 for 6 years. He wasn't the loudest guy on the crew, wasn't the one cracking jokes or holding court at the dinner table, but he was steady, reliable, the kind of firefighter who showed up early, checked his gear twice, and never left a job half done. And he had Diesel. The dog had come to him 2 years ago through the K9 search and rescue program, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a rough start and a nose that could find a needle in a haystack. Diesel had been a shelter dog, pulled from a high-kill facility in Ohio, too smart and too intense for a regular home. But in the firehouse, he'd found his place. Jake had trained him, bonded with him, slept beside him in the bunk room on long shifts. Diesel wasn't just a working dog, he was family. "Morning, superstar," Jake muttered, scratching behind Diesel's ears as the dog stretched in the early light. Diesel's tail thumped against the concrete floor, his eyes bright and alert. He wore a red vest with the station's logo stitched across the chest, and his collar jingled softly when he moved. The other firefighters filed in one by one. Becca Lawson, the paramedic, dropped her bag by the rig and gave Diesel a quick pat. "You ready for another boring day, buddy?" Diesel huffed, as if to say boring wasn't in his vocabulary. Tommy Nguyen, the engineer, was already checking the truck's equipment, his sleeves rolled up and a wrench in hand. He glanced over at Jake. "Captain wants a team meeting at 8. Something about budget cuts." Jake frowned. Budget cuts usually meant fewer resources, older equipment, longer wait times for backup. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded and refilled Diesel's water bowl. The firehouse had a rhythm to it, a heartbeat that pulsed through the day. Morning checks, equipment maintenance, training drills, lunch around the big table in the kitchen where everyone took turns cooking, though Tommy's foe was the undisputed favorite. Afternoons were quieter, filled with paperwork and the occasional false alarm. And then the nights, when the city came alive and the calls started coming in, car accidents, kitchen fires, medical emergencies, the endless parade of human crisis that never stopped. Jake had learned to find peace in the routine, the structure, the certainty that when the alarm rang, everyone knew exactly what to do. But that certainty was about to crack. At 8 o'clock sharp, they gathered in the conference room. Captain Reeves stood at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him, and a look on his face that said he didn't want to be there. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and graying at the temples, the kind of leader who'd earned respect through years of hard calls and harder decisions. "All right, listen up," he began. "City Council's cutting our funding by 15%. That means we're running leaner. Fewer overtime shifts, delayed equipment upgrades, and..." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We're suspending the K9 program. The room went silent. Jake felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What?" Becca said, her voice sharp. "You're cutting Diesel." "Not cutting," Reeves corrected. "Suspending. The dog stays, but we're not funding additional training or certifications. He'll be on standby unless we get a specific SAR call-out." "That's the same as cutting him," Jake said quietly. Reeves met his eyes. "I don't like it either, Martinez, but we don't have a choice." Jake didn't argue. Not then. But as the meeting ended and the crew filtered out, he stayed behind, his hands flat on the table. "Sir, Diesel saved 4 lives in the last year. He's not just a line item." Reeves sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Jake, but the numbers don't care. We've got to make it work." Jake nodded slowly, but inside something hardened. He'd spent years learning to trust the system, to follow orders, to believe that the chain of command existed for a reason, but in that moment, he realized something else. Sometimes the system was wrong. The days that followed were tense. Jake continued his work, but there was a shadow over everything now. Diesel still rode in the truck, still wore his vest, but Jake could see the questions in the other firefighters' eyes. How long before the dog was completely benched? How long before budget cuts turned into layoffs? The city was changing. Everyone could feel it. Property values were skyrocketing, pushing long-time residents out to the suburbs. The industrial district was being eyed by developers, old factories earmarked for luxury condos and artisan coffee shops. Progress, they called it. But progress had a way of forgetting the people who'd been there all along. One afternoon, Jake took Diesel for a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, lined with chain-link fences and loading docks. A few trucks rumbled past, hauling scrap metal and construction debris. Diesel trotted beside him, his nose constantly working, cataloging every cent. Oil and rust, fast food wrappers, the faint sweetness of someone's cigarette smoke. They passed the old warehouse on Industrial Way. It loomed against the grey sky, 3 stories of steel and concrete, windows like empty eyes. A sign on the fence read, "Property of Redstone Development, no trespassing." Jake had driven past this place 100 times and never given it much thought. It was just another relic of the city's industrial past, waiting for its turn under the wrecking ball. But Diesel stopped. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body going still. He stared at the building, his nose lifted, and for a moment Jake thought he'd caught the scent of a rat or a stray cat. Then Diesel whined, low and uncertain. "What is it, boy?" But the moment passed. Diesel shook himself and continued walking, and Jake chalked it up to nothing. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon. The tones dropped at 14:37, the alarm ringing through the firehouse like a hammer on glass. Everyone moved. Boots hit the floor, gear came off the racks, engines roared to life. Jake slid into his turnout coat, his helmet snug, Diesel already at his side with his vest on and his eyes locked on Jake's face. "Structure fire, 1800 block of Industrial Way," the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Warehouse fully involved, no occupants reported." The address registered immediately. The old warehouse, the one Diesel had stared at just 3 days ago. The trucks rolled out into the grey afternoon, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The city blurred past in streaks of color, brick buildings, chain-link fences, loading docks stacked with pallets. The warehouse district was a maze of old factories and storage units, half of them abandoned, the other half barely holding on. When they arrived, the scene was already chaos. The warehouse was a massive steel-frame structure, 3 stories tall and twice as wide, with broken windows and rusted siding. Smoke poured from the upper floors, thick and black, and flames flickered behind the glass like trapped lightning. A small crowd had gathered on the opposite side of the street, workers from nearby buildings, a few homeless people who'd been sleeping in the area, a couple of bystanders filming on their phones. Captain Reeves jumped down from the lead truck, his face set. "Tommy, get a line on that south wall. Becca, stand by with medical. Martinez." He stopped, because Diesel was already pulling toward the building, his nose in the air, his body tense. Jake felt it too, that shift in the air, that prickle at the back of his neck. "Captain," Jake said carefully, "Diesel's alerting." Reeves turned, his eyes narrowing. "Alerting to what?" "Building's empty. City inspectors cleared it this morning." Diesel doesn't think so. The dog was vibrating now, his paws shifting, his gaze fixed on the 3rd floor corner, where the smoke was densest. Jake had seen this 1,000 times. Diesel didn't false alert. If he said someone was in there, someone was in there. But Reeves shook his head. "Structural engineer tagged this place yellow. The floors are unstable. We're not sending anyone inside for a maybe. It's not a maybe, sir. It's Diesel. It's a dog, Martinez, and I'm giving you an order. Stay on the perimeter. Around them, the scene was moving fast. Tommy and 2 other firefighters were dragging hose lines toward the building, connecting to the nearest hydrant. Water began flowing, arcing through the air in silver streams, hissing where it met the flames. Becca was setting up the medical station, unpacking supplies, her hands quick and efficient. But Jake's entire focus was on Diesel. The dog's ears were flat against his head now, his body coiled tight. His eyes never left the building. And then he did something Jake had never seen before. He barked. Not his usual alert bark, sharp and controlled. This was desperate, urgent. A sound that said, "Time is running out." Jake's decision crystallized in that instant. He looked at his captain. Then he looked at his dog, and he made the hardest choice of his life. He unclipped the leash. Martinez, but Jake was already moving. The moment Jake stepped through the warehouse entrance, the world became fire and shadow. The air was a living thing, hot and thick, pressing down on his lungs with every breath. His mask fogged instantly, the edges of his vision narrowing to a tunnel of smoke and flickering orange light. The floor beneath his boots groaned, old concrete laced with cracks, and somewhere above him, metal beams screamed as they bent under the heat. Diesel was ahead, his body low, his movements precise. He didn't hesitate. Dogs didn't second-guess themselves the way humans did. They trusted their instincts. Jake followed. The ground floor was a wasteland of overturned shelving, rotting cardboard boxes, and pools of stagnant water that steamed in the heat. The smoke was so thick, Jake couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead, but he could hear crackling flames, the hiss of water on metal, the distant shouts of his crew outside, and beneath it all, something else, a sound, faint, rhythmic, breathing. "Diesel, seek!" The dog surged forward, his nose skimming the ground, his ears swiveling. Jake kept one hand on the wall, feeling his way through the maze of debris. The heat was unbearable now, baking through his coat, and sweat poured down his face inside the mask. His radio crackled. "Martinez, get out of there! That's a direct order!" He didn't respond. Couldn't. His entire focus was on Diesel, on the way the dog moved with absolute certainty, weaving through the wreckage like he could see through the smoke. They reached the stairwell. It was a narrow metal structure, bolted to the side of the building, and it was sagging. The bolts were pulling free from the wall, the steps twisted and warped from the heat. Jake tested the first step with his boot. It held, barely. "Come on, boy, slow." They climbed. Each step was a gamble. The metal shrieked under Jake's weight, and more than once he felt the whole structure shift, threatening to tear away from the wall entirely. Diesel climbed ahead of him, lighter, faster, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the slick metal. The second floor was worse. The ceiling had partially collapsed, beams hanging like broken ribs, and the fire had spread here, crawling along the walls in sheets of orange and red. The air shimmered with heat, and Jake's lungs burned even through the mask. He could feel his skin blistering under his gloves, but Diesel didn't stop. The dog led him through a narrow corridor, past rooms filled with abandoned machinery and piles of chemical drums. Some of the drums were leaking, the contents pooling on the floor, and Jake's training kicked in. Avoid the puddles, don't breathe too deep, keep moving. His radio crackled again, Reeves's voice cutting through the static. "Martinez, structural integrity is failing. You have 2 minutes before we pull everyone back. 2 minutes. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. Diesel was moving faster now, his body tense, his tail straight. They were close. Jake could feel it. They reached another stairwell, this one even more precarious than the last. The steps were metal grating, rusted through in places, and when Jake put his weight on the first one, it bent beneath him. He grabbed the railing, hot enough to burn even through his gloves, and pulled himself up. Diesel waited at the top, his body silhouetted against the smoke. The third floor was hell. The fire had reached here, consuming everything in its path. Flames crawled across the ceiling, dripping down the walls in molten rivers. The smoke was so dense, Jake could barely see his own hands. His mask was fogging badly now, the edges icing over from condensation, and his lungs were screaming for clean air. But Diesel barked. Once, twice, and then Jake saw it. In the far corner, half hidden under a pile of tarps and fallen insulation, was a shape, a person. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. He dropped to his knees, shoving the debris aside with shaking hands. The tarps were heavy, soaked with chemicals, and underneath them was a man, middle-aged, thin, his face pale and streaked with soot. His eyes were closed, his chest barely moving. "Hey! Hey, can you hear me?" No response. Jake pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. Pulse. Weak, but there. "Diesel, good boy, good boy." He keyed his radio, his voice hoarse. "Martinez to command, I've got a victim. 3rd floor, northwest corner. Male, unconscious, needs immediate evac. Static." Then Reeves's voice, cold and furious. "Martinez, you are in direct violation of orders. Get out now." Not without him. Jake hooked his arms under the man's shoulders and began to drag him toward the stairs. The man was dead weight, limp and unresponsive, and every inch was a battle. Diesel circled them, his eyes bright, his body tense, ready to help however he could. Behind them, a section of ceiling collapsed with a roar that shook the entire building. Flames shot up through the gap, and the heat intensified, turning the air into something solid and choking. Jake's muscles screamed. His vision was narrowing, black spots creeping in at the edges, but he didn't stop. The stairs were agony. Jake had to lower the man step by step, bracing himself against the railing, praying the whole structure didn't collapse. His legs trembled with exhaustion. His lungs felt like they were full of glass. And all around them, the building was dying. Walls cracking, floors sagging, the fire roaring louder and louder. But he didn't stop. Halfway down the 2nd floor stairwell, the man coughed. A wet, rattling sound. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Stay with me," Jake gasped. "We're almost out." The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. His hand clutched weakly at Jake's coat. Diesel was ahead now, leading the way through the smoke, his body a moving beacon. Jake followed, trusting the dog completely, and step by agonizing step they descended. When they reached the ground floor, Jake could see the light from the entrance, the figures of his crew silhouetted against the daylight. He stumbled forward, dragging the man, and Diesel ran ahead, barking, calling them in. Hands grabbed Jake's shoulders. Becca was there, her face tight with fear and anger, and Tommy, pulling the unconscious man free and hauling him toward the waiting ambulance. Jake collapsed to his knees, ripping off his mask, gasping. The cool air hit his lungs like ice water, painful and beautiful all at once. Reeves stood over him, his face like stone. "You're suspended, Martinez." Effective immediately. Jake didn't look up. He just watched as they loaded the man into the ambulance, as Becca started chest compressions, as the sirens wailed into the afternoon. Diesel pressed against his side, panting hard, his fur singed in places, but his eyes still bright. Jake's hand found the dog's head. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. But as the ambulance doors closed and the captain turned his back, Jake knew the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The suspension was immediate and humiliating. Jake was escorted back to the firehouse, his gear confiscated, his badge pulled. He wasn't allowed to enter the station, except to collect his personal belongings. Diesel stayed with him, of course. No one was cruel enough to separate them, but the looks Jake got from the other firefighters ranged from pity to confusion to quiet support. Becca caught him on his way out, her voice low. "That guy you pulled out, he's stable. They're saying he inhaled a ton of smoke, but he's going to make it." Jake nodded, his throat tight. "Good. Jake, you did the right thing. Tell that to Reeves." She hesitated, then squeezed his arm. "I am telling you, and I think a lot of people agree." But agreeing didn't change the facts. Jake had disobeyed a direct order. He'd put himself and his dog at risk, and in the eyes of the department that was inexcusable. Tommy walked up next, his hands shoved in his pockets. "For what it's worth, man, I would have done the same thing." "Thanks, Tommy." "Diesel's a legend, everyone knows it." Jake managed a small smile. "He is." But as he drove home that evening, Diesel in the passenger seat with his head out the window, Jake felt the weight of what he'd done settling on his shoulders. He'd saved a life. That was undeniable. But he'd also shattered the trust between himself and his captain, violated the chain of command that kept firefighters alive. And for what? A homeless man no one even knew was there? Except someone did know. That thought wouldn't leave Jake alone. Someone knew people were in that building. Someone had cleared it as empty when it wasn't, and that someone had almost gotten people killed. For 3 days, Jake stayed home. He walked Diesel in the mornings, tried to distract himself with home repairs, scrolled through news articles about the fire. The local paper had picked up the story, "Firefighter suspended after unauthorized rescue," but the tone was vague, non-committal. The department wasn't talking, and neither was Jake. His apartment was small, a one-bedroom on the third floor of an old building with creaky floorboards and drafty windows. But it was his. Diesel's bed was in the corner, a worn blanket Jake had brought home from the firehouse years ago. The walls were covered with photos, the crew at various calls, Diesel in his vest, a framed commendation from Jake's first year on the job. He spent hours staring at those photos, replaying the fire in his mind, the way Diesel had alerted, the certainty in the dog's eyes, the man's pale face under the tarps, and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. During those 3 days, Jake barely slept. He lay awake at night, listening to the sounds of the city through his open window. Distant sirens, the rumble of late-night traffic, the occasional shout from the street below. Diesel slept on the floor beside his bed, but even the dog seemed restless, shifting position every few hours, his ears twitching at sounds Jake couldn't hear. On the second day, Jake received a call from his union representative. The conversation was brief and professional. They'd file a grievance, of course, challenge the suspension, but the rep was honest with Jake. Disobeying a direct order was serious. The best they could hope for was a reduced penalty, maybe mandatory retraining instead of termination. "You saved a life, Jake," the rep said, "but you also broke protocol. The department has to balance both of those things." Jake understood. He just didn't agree. That evening, he took Diesel to the park near his apartment. It was a small green space, mostly used by dog walkers and families with young children. Jake threw a tennis ball and Diesel raced after it with the same intensity he brought to every search and rescue operation. The dog never did anything halfway. An older man sitting on a nearby bench called out to Jake, "That's a beautiful dog you've got there." "Thanks. Working dog, isn't he? I can tell by the way he moves." Jake nodded. "Search and rescue, fire department." The man's eyes lit up. "You're the firefighter from the news, the one who went into that warehouse." Jake tensed. He hadn't wanted to be recognized, hadn't wanted to talk about it. "Yeah, that's me." The man stood and walked over, extending his hand. "Walter Chen. I just wanted to say thank you. My nephew was homeless for 5 years before he got back on his feet. People like you who don't give up on people like him, it matters." Jake shook his hand, surprised by the emotion in the older man's voice. "I was just doing my job." "No," Walter said firmly. "You were doing more than that. You were seeing someone everyone else had stopped looking at." After Walter left, Jake sat on the bench with Diesel at his feet, turning those words over in his mind. Seeing someone everyone else had stopped looking at. That was it, wasn't it? That was the heart of the problem. The city had stopped seeing the people living in that warehouse. They'd become invisible, easier to ignore than to help. And someone had decided it was easier to burn them out than face the uncomfortable truth of their existence. On the 4th day, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Jake Martinez?" A woman's voice, soft and tentative. "Yeah. Who's this?" "My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm the sister of the man you pulled out of the warehouse. Marcus Donnelly." Jake's chest tightened. "How is he?" "He's awake. He's going to recover." Her voice wavered. "I wanted to thank you. The doctors said if you'd waited even a few more minutes. It wasn't just me, my dog found him." "I know, that's why I'm calling." She paused. "Jake, there's something you need to know. Something Marcus told me, and I think you're in trouble." The meeting was arranged for that evening, at a diner on the outskirts of town. Jake brought Diesel, who sat quietly under the table, his eyes watchful. Claire arrived 10 minutes later, a small woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She slid into the booth across from Jake, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "You said I'm in trouble." Claire nodded slowly. "Marcus is homeless, has been for 2 years. He used to work as a security guard at that warehouse, back when it was still operational. When the company shut down, he stayed. He knew the building, knew where to sleep, where to avoid the rats and the leaks. It wasn't safe, but it was familiar." Jake frowned. "The city said the building was empty." "They did, and they lied." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, thick with papers and photographs. She spread them across the table. "These are inspection reports, city records, emails between the property owner and the municipal office." She tapped one of the documents. "The owner wanted to demolish the building, but there was a problem. The land is worth a fortune, prime real estate for redevelopment. If the city found out there were people living inside, they'd have to offer relocation services, delay the demolition, maybe even open an investigation into housing code violations. So they covered it up," Jake said, his voice flat. "Worse, they scheduled the demolition without proper notice. Marcus wasn't the only one in there, Jake. There were 5 other people, squatters mostly, people with nowhere else to go. The city knew, the property owner knew, and they set that building on fire anyway. Jake stared at her. You're saying this was arson. I'm saying this was murder. Her eyes were bright with tears. And you saved my brother. But now they're trying to make you the villain because you exposed the truth. Jake's hands clenched on the table. Diesel shifted under the booth, pressing against his leg, a warm and solid presence. How did Marcus get these documents? He used to have access to the building's security office, old passwords, old files. When he heard rumors about the demolition, he started digging. He thought maybe he could buy himself some time, find a lawyer, prove he had a right to be there, but then the fire started. Who set it? We don't know. But Marcus thinks it was a contractor hired by Redstone Development. Someone who could make it look like an accident. Old wiring, chemical storage, plenty of fuel. Easy to blame on neglect. Jake's mind was racing. Did he tell the police? He tried. They took his statement, but they didn't seem interested. He's homeless, Jake. People don't listen to homeless people. I'll make them listen. Claire looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. How? I don't know yet, but I will. She pushed the folder across the table. Take these, make copies. Do whatever you need to do. Marcus is alive because of you. The least I can do is help you fight back. Jake spent the rest of the evening in his apartment, reading through every document in the folder. The picture that emerged was damning. Email chains between city officials discussing how to handle the vagrant problem, inspection reports that had been falsified, listing the building as empty when it clearly wasn't, contracts with Redstone Development that included clauses about expedited clearance, and then there were the photos. Marcus had taken them with an old phone camera, images of the people living in the warehouse, makeshift beds in corners, clothes hung on lines to dry, a small camping stove where someone had been cooking, evidence of human life that the city had decided didn't matter. Jake made copies of everything. He organized it chronologically, highlighted the most damning passages and built a timeline, and then he called an old friend. Detective Lisa Park had worked arson cases for the city police department for 15 years. She and Jake had crossed paths dozens of times over the years, and she'd always struck him as someone who cared more about the truth than the politics. They met at a coffee shop downtown, Lisa in plain clothes, her badge clipped to her belt. She listened as Jake laid out everything, the documents, Marcus's story, the suspicious timing of the fire. When he finished, she sat back, her expression unreadable. This is serious, Jake. I know. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about criminal conspiracy, arson, attempted murder. People in high places are going to fight this. I know that too. She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Let me take this to my captain. I can't promise anything, but I'll push for a full investigation. Thank you, Lisa. Don't thank me yet, you're still suspended. And if this blows up, you could lose a lot more than your job. Jake met her eyes. Then I lose it, but at least I'll know I did the right thing. The next morning, Jake went to the station. He didn't have his badge. He didn't have permission. But he had Diesel, and he had the folder Claire had given him, and he had a fire in his chest that no captain's order could extinguish. He walked through the bay doors just as the crew was gearing up for a training drill. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Captain Reeves stepped out of his office, his face hard. Martinez, you're not supposed to be here. I know, but you need to see this. Jake dropped the folder on the hood of the nearest truck, the papers spilling out. Becca came closer, her eyes scanning the documents. Tommy leaned in, his face tightening. These are city emails, Becca said slowly. They knew people were in that building. They knew, Jake confirmed, and they burned it anyway. Marcus Donnelly was supposed to die in that fire. So were 5 other people. If Diesel hadn't alerted, if I hadn't gone in, this would have been swept under the rug. Reeves picked up one of the emails, his jaw working. Where did you get these? Does it matter? It matters if you're about to accuse the city of a crime. I'm not accusing, I'm showing you the evidence. The room was silent. Outside, a truck rolled past, its siren fading into the distance. Diesel sat at Jake's feet, his head high, his eyes on the captain. Tommy spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. Captain, I was there. I saw how Diesel alerted. That dog doesn't make mistakes. Becca nodded. Neither does Jake. One by one, the other firefighters stepped forward. Sarah Chen, who'd been with the department for 12 years. Mike Rodriguez, a rookie who'd joined just 6 months ago. Even old Pete, the veteran engineer who rarely said anything, cleared his throat. Captain, Pete said, his voice gravelly, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen a firefighter willing to throw away his career to do the right thing. If Martinez says there's something wrong here, I believe him. Reeves looked around the bay at the faces of his crew. Then he looked back at Jake. If this is real, we have to report it. I already did, Jake said. I sent copies to the fire marshal, the police, and the local news. But I wanted you to see it first, because you suspended me for doing the right thing, and I think you know that. Reeves' face was unreadable. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, slowly, very slowly, Reeves nodded. You're reinstated. Effective immediately. A cheer went up from the crew. Becca hugged Jake, and Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. Even the guys from the other shifts who'd been watching from the sidelines came forward to shake his hand. But Jake's eyes stayed on Reeves. The captain extended his hand. I'm sorry, Martinez. You were right, I should have trusted you. Jake took his hand. We all make calls, sir. I just hope mine was worth it. It was. The captain's grip was firm, and Jake saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect. Maybe even a little bit of awe. Get your gear, Reeves said. We've got work to do. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The city launched an internal review within 24 hours of Lisa Park, presenting the evidence to her captain. The fire marshal opened a criminal inquiry, bringing in forensic specialists to comb through the warehouse wreckage, looking for evidence of accelerants and ignition sources. Within 3 days, they found it. Traces of gasoline in multiple locations throughout the building, all in areas that would ensure maximum spread of the fire. Burn patterns that indicated multiple ignition points, set deliberately to overlap and create an inferno that would be difficult to control. The demolition contractor was brought in for questioning. He cracked within hours, admitting that he'd been hired by a representative of Redstone Development to clear the building, but claiming he hadn't known there were people inside. The representative, a man named Derek Shaw, disappeared before police could bring him in, but they didn't need him. The paper trail was enough. Within a week, the property owner was arrested, a real estate mogul named Vincent Hargrove, who'd made millions flipping properties throughout the city. The charges included conspiracy to commit arson, reckless endangerment, and 6 counts of attempted murder. Within 2 weeks, 3 city officials had resigned under pressure. The head of the building inspection department, a city councilwoman who'd been on Redstone's payroll, and a deputy in the mayor's office who'd helped expedite the demolition permits. And within a month, the story had exploded into a full-blown scandal that made national headlines. City officials accused of arson to clear homeless encampment. Firefighters' disobedience exposes deadly cover-up. Rescue dog saves lives, uncovers conspiracy. Jake's phone rang constantly. Producers from morning shows, journalists from major newspapers, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted his story. He turned them all down. The only interview he agreed to was with a local reporter named Amy Tran, who'd been covering homelessness issues in the city for years. They met at the firehouse, and Amy brought a camera operator who filmed Diesel demonstrating his search skills for the piece. Why did you go in? Amy asked. When you knew it could cost you your job? Jake thought about it for a moment, scratching behind Diesel's ears. Because Diesel told me to, he said simply, and I trust him more than I trust any system or policy. He saw a person who needed help. That's all that mattered. The piece aired on the local news that evening and was picked up by national outlets the next day. The segment ended with footage of Marcus Donnelly, now recovered and living in a transitional housing facility, meeting Diesel for the second time. Marcus knelt down, his hands gentle on the dog's head, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he said softly. Thank you for not giving up on me. 2 months later, the firehouse held a ceremony. The bay doors were open, the afternoon light streaming in, and the whole crew was assembled in their dress uniforms. The mayor was there, awkward and apologetic, and so was the fire marshal, who presented Jake with a commendation for bravery. But the real moment came when Claire Donnelly stepped forward, Marcus at her side. He was thinner than he'd been in the hospital, but his eyes were clear, his skin had color, and his hand was steady when he shook Jake's. Thank you, Marcus said simply. You gave me my life back. Jake nodded, his throat tight. Thank Diesel. And as if on cue, the German shepherd stepped forward, his tail wagging, his vest gleaming in the light. Marcus knelt down, and the dog leaned into him, accepting the embrace with the calm dignity of an animal who knew exactly what he'd accomplished. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, speeches were made. The fire marshal talked about the importance of trusting trained K9 officers. The mayor promised increased funding for homeless services and stricter oversight of demolition projects. Captain Reeves spoke about the courage it takes to question authority when lives are at stake. But the moment that stuck with Jake came later, after the ceremony had ended and most people had left. A young woman approached him, a teenager with a backpack and nervous eyes. She introduced herself as Samantha and explained that she'd been one of the other people living in the warehouse when the fire started. "I got out through a window on the second floor," she said, "but I didn't know if Marcus had made it. I was too scared to tell anyone I'd been there. I thought I'd get in trouble." "You're not in trouble," Jake assured her. "I know that now, and I wanted to thank you. Because of what you did, because you made people pay attention, the city actually cares now. They found me a place to stay. They're helping me finish high school." She reached out and patted Diesel's head. "Tell him he's a good dog." Jake smiled. He already knows. That night, after the ceremony, after the speeches and the handshakes and the photos, Jake sat on the roof of the firehouse with Diesel beside him. The city stretched out below, a patchwork of lights and shadows, and the air was cool and clean. Becca climbed up beside him, handing him a bottle of water. "You're a hero, Martinez." "I'm just a guy with a good dog," she smiled. "That's what all the heroes say." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars come out. "What happens now?" Becca asked. "We go back to work," Jake said. "Answer calls, save lives. Just like always." Just like always. But both of them knew it wasn't quite the same. Something had shifted. The city had been forced to confront its own failures, to acknowledge the people it had tried to forget. Shelters were being built. Outreach programs expanded. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better, and that mattered. Tommy joined them on the roof, carrying a six-pack of beer. "Captain said we can have one, just one." They sat together, the three of them and Diesel, watching the city breathe beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Another crew, racing toward another emergency. The work never stopped. But tonight, just for a moment, they could rest. 6 months after the fire, Jake stood on the roof of the firehouse with Diesel beside him. The city stretched out below, a patchwork of lights and shadows, and the air was cool and clean. It was late evening, the shift almost over. The crew was downstairs finishing dinner, their voices drifting up through the open stairwell. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, another crew racing toward another emergency. Jake scratched behind Diesel's ears, the dog's eyes half closed in contentment. "You know what, buddy? I think we made a difference." Diesel's tail thumped against the roof. The warehouse district had changed. The old buildings were being carefully renovated now, turned into community centers and affordable housing. Marcus Donnelly had found a place to live, a small apartment with a view of the park. He'd even gotten a job working security for a non-profit that helped other homeless people find their footing. And Jake? He was back to doing what he loved, showing up, checking his gear, trusting his dog. The investigation had concluded with multiple arrests and a complete overhaul of the city's demolition procedures. Redstone Development had filed for bankruptcy. The officials who'd orchestrated the cover-up were facing criminal charges. Vincent Hargrove had been denied bail and was awaiting trial. Justice wasn't always fast, but sometimes it came. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Marcus wanted me to tell you he's doing great. He's been sober for 4 months and just got promoted at work. Says he owes you everything." Jake typed back, "He owes Diesel." A moment later, "Then tell Diesel thank you from both of us, and tell him Marcus is thinking about adopting a dog of his own. Says he wants to give a shelter dog the same second chance you both gave him." Jake smiled and pocketed his phone. He looked down at Diesel, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. "You hear that, boy? You're starting a trend." The dog's tail wagged harder. Below, the alarm tones dropped. The crew scrambled, voices sharp and urgent. Jake stood, Diesel already on his feet, alert and ready. They descended the stairs together, Jake sliding into his gear with practiced ease. The truck's engine roared to life. The bay doors rolled open, and as they pulled out into the night, sirens blazing, Jake felt that familiar surge of purpose. This was why he did it. Not for the glory or the recognition, but for the moments when everything hung in the balance, when a choice had to be made, when trust and training and instinct came together, when a life could be saved. Diesel sat in the jump seat beside him, eyes forward, ready for whatever came next. And Jake knew with absolute certainty that no matter what orders came down, no matter what rules had to be followed or broken, he would always trust this dog, because Diesel had never been wrong, and he never would be. The city lights blurred past the windows. The radio crackled with coordinates, and somewhere ahead someone was waiting, someone who needed help, someone who would be found. Because heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear fur, and sometimes the most important orders are the ones you break. A year passed, then another. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals and crises. But the changes it sparked remained. New policies, better oversight, a shift in how the city treated its most vulnerable residents. Jake received letters from people across the country, other firefighters, dog handlers, people who'd been homeless themselves. They thanked him. They told him he'd given them hope. But Jake always redirected the credit. It was Diesel, he'd say, I just followed him. And it was true. The dog had known. When everyone else had been ready to walk away, when the system had failed, when convenience had trumped compassion, Diesel had known, and he'd refused to let go. That loyalty, that certainty, that refusal to abandon someone in need, that was what had changed everything. Not Jake's defiance, not the investigation, not the media firestorm, just a dog who wouldn't give up. On a quiet Sunday morning, 2 years after the fire, Jake drove out to the cemetery where his father was buried. His dad had been a firefighter too, killed in the line of duty when Jake was 19. It was his death that had pushed Jake into the profession, driven by a need to honor his memory, to carry on the work. Jake stood at the gravestone, Diesel beside him, and told his father everything about the fire, the suspension, the choice he'd made. I don't know if you'd be proud, Jake said quietly. I broke the rules. I could have gotten killed, but I couldn't leave that man behind. I couldn't let Diesel's alert mean nothing. The wind moved through the trees, soft and gentle. I guess I learned that from you, that sometimes doing the right thing means going against the grain, that loyalty matters more than policy, that we don't leave people behind. Diesel leaned against Jake's leg, a warm and steady presence. I hope I made you proud, Dad. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the grass, and Jake felt for the first time in a long time a deep and abiding peace. He knelt down beside Diesel, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. You're the best partner I could have asked for, he whispered. The best friend. Thank you for never giving up. Diesel's tail wagged and he licked Jake's face, making him laugh. They stayed there for a while longer, man and dog, in the quiet of the morning. Then they got back in the truck and drove home, ready for whatever the next call would bring. Because the work was never done. There were always more fires to fight, more lives to save, more people who needed someone to see them. And as long as Jake had Diesel by his side, he knew they'd keep answering that call, together.